So once again, sorry about all the mess.
No problem.
Really sorry about it.
No problem.
So I know we've been talking, and I really love your thoughts on like movement, but still, can you introduce yourself for the audience?
Yep. So my name is Hailu Theodros. I am an athletic development coach who's working for Chelsea. I've been working for Chelsea for the last 8 seasons. At Chelsea, I work across a variety of age groups, predominantly the 9s to 15s groups, but then also supporting with the 18s and 23s program. So I've had a real experience in that time to kind of see the whole pathway of athletic development in that setting. Particular passions around speed and agility development, specific to football, but also in a broader sense as well.
Cool. So just in case like the audience know what we are talking about, so when you mentioned football, it's actually like soccer for us, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Sorry.
That's a very big detail. Yeah, soccer.
Cool. So first thing, what's it like to be in a pro setting?
No, it's great. It's a great environment to be in, especially at one of the bigger clubs in the UK. You get to work with, I guess, the top 1% in the country, which is a real privilege, and get to work with really talented individuals. I think some of the things that I really enjoy is more just this real pursuit for high performance and really working in a real high performance space, with regards to the amount of detail that goes into the work that happens, but also the competition side of things. Obviously, it's not always about competition for those groups, and there's a big emphasis on development, but there are still very competitive elements to the program. So I think that's something that I really enjoy at the club, and I think on top of that, probably even more so, something I really enjoy is really being on the journey and following players through the program. It's something I enjoy about working in pro setting. Really good, really enjoyable.
Cool. So when you train like football players, they need to be like sprint and decelerate, and there's a lot of like change of direction going on. Mm-hmm. And so first of all, like how do you train like speed when it comes to like football players?
Okay, so I think it looks very different across the age groups. Well, not very different, slightly different emphasis across age groups. So the program that we have at the younger groups is very much this idea of going general to specific as we go through the program. So when we get to the 9s, we just want them to be competent at a wide range of movements that are both non-sport specific, but also sport specific movements. And I think speed development at those ages is very much teaching fundamental skills of how to skip, jump, gallop, and do different locomotor skills in different ways, as we believe that definitely forms a foundation for players understanding how to apply force, coordination, rhythm, which are really key components to sprinting when you get to the older age groups, in general, as a skill. So that's what it looks like at the young groups, and that is kind of developed in the form of games and constrained games to kind of achieve different outcomes that we would like, but keep things very much fun and engaging for the younger groups. And as we go through the age groups, when we get to a lot of 13s to 15s age groups, there is an extra emphasis on rhythm and coordination because of some of the maturation changes that they're going through. That might look like a bit more your traditional sprint drills, whether that be dribbles, whether that be skips, and again, using them to really emphasize coordination and different core shapes for sprinting, as it's a time where players are finding their bodies are changing quite a lot, and just honing in on some really specific points of sprinting becomes really important. And then as we start to get through to the older groups, I think the sprint training tends to look a bit more traditional in what we understand, with a combination of like weight room based work, where we're really trying to improve force production capabilities of tissues, but also the system as a whole, and then supporting that with real sprint specific drills, like I mentioned, some dribbles and maybe some resistance based exercises, to really try and elevate speed in these footballers.
So, like, can you like walk us through like how do you program the training for a whole week? Like, is there like specific theme for like different days?
Yes. Yeah. So we tend to work in a way that kind of complements the footballing on pitch focus as well. So depending on the theme or the physical focus for that day from a physiological perspective, we might have days that are a bit more tighter and a bit more focused around acceleration, deceleration, at the start of the week, because that tends to be the most taxing for the players, and we want to try and keep that day further away from the game. So that'll be early in the week, and these are opportunities for us to emphasize acceleration or deceleration capabilities, like I mentioned, both in the gym but also on the pitch, and utilizing the time in the warm-up to really be direct our focus towards that specific area, which will then lead into the training session quite well, because those are the types of movements that the session will reflect. And then when we get into towards the middle of the week, we start to, as the on-pitch focus becomes bigger spaces and more 10v10, 11v11 type practices, we want to prepare the players for being able to open up, so reach higher speeds, and that's when we tend to focus on our linear speed and top speed capabilities. So again, what the warm-up and what the weight room might look like is going to be a bit more focused around stiffness, hamstring specific work in terms of specific positions, very specific to sprinting, and really trying to develop the resilience of the tissues specific for top speed work. And then they would then go into their session, which again reflects a bigger space. And then finally, as we come into the latter end of the week, things become a bit more explosive, and then emphasis on change of direction and acceleration is going to be a bit more of the focus, especially at the older groups, because we're really in that real specific phase, and the generic work fits in the program elsewhere to a lesser degree. So yeah, as the practices start to look a bit more explosive, and there's a real emphasis on change direction and acceleration capabilities. So developing that within the week, and then just tapering off in terms of volume and load as we come towards game day, just to promote freshness as we would like for the game.
Cool. So when we talk about like acceleration and like deceleration, is there like any, let's say, how would you like train deceleration, since it's like a big topic right now and a lot of coaches discuss about this. Mm-hmm. So how would you like program deceleration?
So I think definitely a combined approach to improve deceleration is really needed. And what I mean by combined approach, I would say developing the physical qualities needed within a gym setting, but then also on pitch, just getting really familiar with certain positions. And this is where my own beliefs around this is there are capacities and there's skills that are needed for deceleration, and some of those skills are your ability to drop center of mass, your ability to shift weight backwards, or project backwards, is a skill, I believe, and that is really important for deceleration. Being able to be comfortable with basic support outside of the body, be strong enough to do that, So those are the skills I would say are really important to develop. And then the capacities are going to be, yes, and just force production in an eccentric sense, in an isometric sense, are going to be massively important and actually probably largely dictate how well we can execute the skills. So I would say this combined approach is definitely needed, but being able to understand which player sits on which side or where they need to spend their time is greatly valuable. And some of the work that Speedworks have done with regards to using footage to kind of assess deceleration ability can be very helpful for that. But that would be tend to be how I would approach it. And actually, I think, in my personal opinion, I think there's these capacity and skills or amount of attention we show these different areas need to be present throughout. For me, it would just be which one are we turning the dial up on for a particular player. So one player might have a slight emphasis. We're always going to do capacity and skill-based work for deceleration. However, this individual, the biggest thing that's going to drive change for him and maybe spending more time on capacity, but we are still going to work on skills because there's a constant need to understand how to use these qualities in a real practical sense. And then in terms of what those skills look like, I think there are drills that are out there like drop catches and an emphasis on deceleration ability. But for me, deceleration needs to look like deceleration. And actually spend time accelerating to stopping in different positions, different approach speeds, different angles. I think really kind of trying to challenge the variation and the depth of those skills are really important by changing direction, speed, load, are going to be really, really important for a general understanding of how to decelerate. And then there's an opportunity then for us to dive a bit more specific into what this looks like in a game, whether that be for basketball, whether that be for soccer, whether that be for American football, because there are slight variations for each sport as much as it's a general physical quality. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course. So we often talk about like physical capacity about like when it comes to like multi-directional movement or like deceleration and acceleration. We didn't spend a lot. I mean, in Asia, we didn't spend a lot of time discuss things like skill. So can you like talk or like I want to like dive a little bit deeper about like deceleration skill. What should we be focus on? Is it like the shin angle or like what you just mentioned, the center of mass should be dropping? And how should we train the skill?
So I think shin angle and body angle are things that kind of are indicators of things we might look for. I think there's still a bandwidth of what is expected. I don't think I'm a big believer that there isn't this one way a movement should look. I think there are key KPIs that we need to be looking for within movement and are consistent across the best athletes. So shin angles and trunk are going to be important areas to look at. But what I mean by skill is largely it tends to be a lot of the coordination and neuromuscular qualities of those movements. So the ability to drop center of mass without changing knee angle too much and be able to have isometric actions at the knee and at the hip. Isometric actions at the hip and the trunk. Okay, whilst knee is moving is very much a skill. Okay, and it is also something that is underpinned by physical qualities, but how we understand how we shift our weight and how we control one joint as we move the other, and that disassociation is very much a skill that we need to practice. So that is largely what I'm referring to when I say skill. I think there is a tendency because of research and because of, I think we can be sometimes very reductionist in our approach in sports science and S&C. I think we tend to focus very much on the tissues and what the tissues capabilities are, but I think the work that has been done in skill acquisition and some of the great work that Speedworks and those guys are doing is shining a light on how the skill of being able to execute an action, okay, can largely influence how well their physical qualities are expressed. We can't just expect that we need to do things in the gym and expect a direct transfer. It sets us up to do things really well, but do players understand how to disassociate? Do players understand how to synchronize actions at specific joints? And that goes for saying for speed work. So top speed, the ability to be stiff, okay, as you hit the ground is very much a skill as much as it is an ability to produce vertical force. And actually having the time in the ankle, knee, hip, it becomes a really important quality that we can develop in through pogos to be more skillful at some of those movements, minimizing time, increasing stiffness, and qualities like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course. Love it. So
also, sorry, just to add on to that, I think one thing we tend to see in deceleration is some of the strategies that players use can be, so you spoke about shin angle there. We definitely want to be able to see those shin angles reflecting a backward projection. So slightly more vertical shin angles, as they tend to give clues to us where weight is being shifted. And same for acceleration. It would probably be the opposite of acceleration that we want to see. But then also some of the stopping strategies that people tend to have. Some tend to have a bit more an emphasis on hip flexion and lack a bit of trunk discipline, okay, which can be detrimental for deceleration or stopping or braking, however you want to call it. But then also people's step strategies, increasing step frequency or a decrease in step frequency as we come to decelerate can largely tell us how well they are able to shift the center of mass backwards as a skill perspective, but also might even give us clues that they might not have the physical quality to be able to hit the ground hard and spike an eccentric force in the ground to be able to decelerate, which means they might have to spread that deceleration out over several steps as opposed to doing that in a short space of time. And if we're looking at the game, okay, an inability to really apply that force, but then also skillfully execute that in terms of dropping center of mass and base support outside of the body becomes really important, because we don't have the time spaces available in sport to be able to execute it in all the time that we would like, because deceleration tends to happen in off the ball situations a lot of the time, where the movement or the deceleration is dictated by the attacker's movement, which always means that we have a time constraint, which I think definitely links to why people can tend to get injured in deceleration situations, just as their inability to produce the right forces, but also to organize the body in a way that is efficient and safe from a mechanical perspective.
Cool. So so much for deceleration. So next thing I kind of want to talk about is like multi-directional movement, or like change of direction.
Okay.
And I know we talked about this topic before. So can I like talk a little bit about what is the difference between change of direction and agility?
So I think we're starting to get a bit more clarity around this. But for me, agility is the presence of an external stimulus, and change direction in the presence of external stimulus, both in a non-specific and a specific sense. And then change direction is just the raw ability to change direction without a external stimulus. That tend to be how I would see them. And the differences there are kind of the presence of reaction is going to be a quality, but also perception and action qualities. The ability to perceive what is in the environment and make a decision and execute a movement that is relevant for that action becomes really important. So then these decision-making qualities and that individual's understanding of a situation becomes really important on how well we can execute a movement. But change direction will be, yes, very much an emphasis on the physical element of agility, not necessarily the perceptual elements or the decision-making components.
Cool. So when it comes to like change of direction, or when you're trying to like focusing more on the movement side of thing, is it the same with when we train linear speed, like acceleration, deceleration? Is it the same, and how is the movement different?
Sorry, can you just, when you say similar to acceleration, what do you mean there?
I mean,
with regards to
is it like the same? We gotta push up hard.
Yeah, so I think there's some consistencies, and I think again some of the concepts that Speedworks present definitely apply. Some of those principles in terms of projection, reaction, switching, I think they definitely apply. I think largely it is the application of force in terms of which direction we're applying that force that begins to differ. But essentially, depending on the angles of change direction, the emphasis is to be able to get into a position where you're able to re-accelerate. And I think in more shallow angles that we tend to see in American football, there is, the angles of change direction are slightly more shallow, which is a bit more about a projection of force in a slightly different direction. As we start to get towards 90 degrees and 180 degrees, there becomes an extra emphasis on the ability to decelerate in order to change direction in a particular direction. Now starting to look at how we use to manipulate our orientation of force becomes really important. And then, but very much I would say, if we're talking about shallow movements, I would say it is largely the differences are where we are projecting that force and our ability to control our trunk, to minimize time spent on the ground to be able to re-accelerate again. And I think it's important to really differentiate how these may look in different attacking and defensive situations in sports, because the angles vary quite a lot. And also the objective for the player varies a lot. I think attackers are largely changing direction to exploit space, okay, to really create space or exploit space to move into, whether that be basketball, whether that be football. And therefore, the change direction angles tend to be slightly more shallow, and trunk movements are largely orientated around shifting a defender one way or another to create space to move into and to re-accelerate into, whereas defensive actions tend to be larger changes of depending on what part of the pitch and the space available, but generally tend to be more harsher angles from 90 towards 180, and that places an extra emphasis on ability to decelerate, but then also trunk orientation to redirect our next step to accelerate into a new direction.
Cool. So when you are gonna be training your athletes at the beginning of their, like, let's say their career, and you're gonna start like teaching them the movement, is there like because some of the coaches are gonna categorize multi-directional movement into like crossover, shuffle, or like open steps. Is there like how would you like categorize multi-directional movement?
Yes. So those skills that you mentioned there, so crossover step, shuffle, and a drop step, I would see them as transitional movements that really allow us to connect deceleration and acceleration, especially in harsher changes of direction. So definitely would be an emphasis on applying those skills as in a bit more of a closed sense. Grasp we be able to do in a lateral crossover step and drop step. We can learn how to reorientate force. in order to get into certain positions quicker. So I think they are definitely good fundamentals to begin with. I think a big focus for me is, especially with our younger groups, is we try to emphasize taking these closed skills and really structured skills into more open settings, because I think in sport, I don't think they're as clear cut as this is a drop step and this is a shuffle. I think the what happens in the game dictates which one is most relevant. So a shuffle might be slightly more relevant to apply in shorter spaces, whereas a drop step might be really important to really turn and go the other way. Okay, or it might be a shuffle into a drop step. Okay, they're not so clear cut. So once we have a grasp of physically, and we can execute these movements physically in a closed sense, I think is very important to shift towards more open-based practices, which are a bit more about the decision making, a bit more about problem solving, whether that be in the form of tag games that we tend to use quite a lot, tag games, and if different emphasis on attacking and defensive players, and not setting so many clear rules on this is a shuffle or this is a drop step. Actually, can we solve the problem that is in front of us and utilize which skill is most relevant for that situation? And really trying to equip players with that understanding and knowledge to problem solve certain situations, because it isn't always so clear and it isn't so separated as we might like to believe. So that's how we would tend to approach it, moving from this closed to open based scale or spectrum, and that might happen depending on the group in front of me. That might happen quite quickly, that transition to open based practices, or it might take long if we really feel like we need to spend extra time on players understanding how to project or orientate force in a different direction within those shuffle, crossover, or drop step patterns. But the emphasis is always, can we move quickly to open game-based type practices and recreating some of those situations that happen in a game.
So because you mentioned like skill a lot, and we didn't discuss a lot about like physical capacity, can I like understand this way? It's more about like teaching the athlete about the skill, and let them be like familiar with the skill, and they'll be able to like problem solve themselves.
Yes. Yeah. So teaching the skills in a very raw sense, and in terms of really separating that into like a lateral shuffle or a run to deceleration. So emphasizing what we would like to see in order to execute that skill well, and then moving them straight into, or moving them towards situations where they have to problem solve and understand that, okay, in this situation I was beaten, or I wasn't able to change direction very well because I maybe didn't drop my center of mass, or actually I didn't understand that the space was really tight, so I needed to decelerate really well. Okay, and those are some of the a lot of the time tends to be where I spend most of my time coaching. Actually, a lot of the players can pick up those skills in a close sense very well, but when you take it into open sense, aren't able to reorganize, okay, and solve those problems in game. But as much as I shed an emphasis there, I think it's more because I think we need to move closer to coaching in those environments and getting better at maybe some constraints-based practices and designing a bit more chaotic environments in a controlled setting in order to achieve what we want to see from a physical perspective. But yes, I wouldn't then remove the focus from physical capacities. I think they're going to be really important to underpinning how well these individuals are able to achieve that. And actually, a lot of the time, maybe the door that opens their understanding of how to execute it from a skill perspective. So what I mean by that is if a player isn't able to produce eccentric force or large forces in the ground when decelerating, it's going to be really, really hard for them to understand how to suddenly and sharply project backwards and drop center of mass, which is a skill. Okay, if they can't impart that force on the ground, it's going to be really difficult for them to understand how to execute that. especially when you take it to an open setting. I just think we have a fairly good knowledge on the physical qualities, but maybe not so much around the skills. And I think that is definitely getting better, but I definitely think need to push that a bit more, that clarity and understanding around those areas.
Yeah. So when it comes like teaching maybe how to like deceleration in the sagittal plane or like a frontal plane, like when we teach like linear speed, there's like skip, switch, or like a stiff leg run, that kind of stuff. So are you gonna be teaching like these rudimentary skills for your athletes?
Yeah. So a lot of exercises that I tend to have, are like my go-to for deceleration work is I tend to do a lot of metronome work, which is more on this. I'm a big believer that rhythm is really important, even in deceleration, just to help people understand how to connect movements at different joints. And having an external reference like a metronome can be really helpful for understanding how to absorb force across joints, how to absorb force fast, and at the same time in a synchronized manner. So some of my drills tend to be working between two lines. Okay, can you accelerate, decelerate here, turn, accelerate, decelerate here, but to a metronome beat. So we hit the beat on each side. Other exercises are going to be like banded drills. Banded drills is for me is great, where we just overemphasize the deceleration element by pulling someone deeper into some of those pulling them deeper into forward momentum, so to speak, and asking players to really decelerate against that is going to be really important. Even some jump variations. I think jump variations are really important. Can allow us to really understand how to absorb force, how to really change our center of mass, and we can manipulate that by doing 1 to 2 landings, where we really emphasize an ability to sit into the hip and really this triple flexion that we might look for in deceleration. And then equally with change direction, a lot of lateral plyometric progressions are going to be really important, like skater jumps. Skater jumps, rotational jumps are going to be really important. And those are definitely like the rudimentary skills that I would compare to acceleration and the acceleration speed-based work that we do. So yeah, massively important. I think there's an emphasis there there's an opportunity in those rudimentary skills is to really get some key concepts across in some of those, because essentially it is a breaking down of some of those movements, right? So there's loads of time. There's an opportunity to really overcoach, really dive into some of the specific details before moving into something a bit more chaotic or a bit more whole, so to speak.
Do you like let's say when I coach like multi-directional movement, I usually put the rudimentary skill and not really chaotic, but like mirror drills on the same day after I teach the rudimentary skills.
Yeah.
Is it the same with you, or how would you program it?
Yeah. So definitely can do those rudimentary skills actually as potentially part of a gym session as well. So I'll probably go through 3 of those. So the one that you mentioned is one way I would go and do it, in terms of starting with the rudimentary skills and kind of logically building up to what we're trying to work towards, and finishing off with real change of direction. Or I would actually tend to use it a bit more as a learning tool. Actually, we're going to start with maybe not start with it, but after a warm-up, go into real change direction. But then I'm going to break it down, then come back into change direction. So almost this whole sequencing to use bands and use some of those rudimentary skills as an education tool to what they might not be doing in the change direction drill itself. A lot of that tends to be getting them to understand how to project and really push away in a lateral lateral direction, or really understanding how to sit into deceleration that they might not be doing in the drill, taking them to the side and really focusing on that movement with a band and in some of those banded drills is really great to get them to understand what it feels like and what we should be seeing before we go back to what we were doing in the original drill. And then finally, I would say, the other option I tend to use it in is supporting some of those gym sessions. So maybe contrast we've done an eccentric emphasis in a lift, and take that back as eccentric component, more specific to deceleration. I think I've lost you. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. So I would say those three structures tend to be how I program in a day.
Okay. So there's a movement and some, like we just mentioned, like chaotic and weight room stuff, right?
Yeah.
So
linear progression, whole part whole, and then an extension of a gym session tend to be how I would view them.
How long was the session going to be?
For some of those sessions.
Yeah.
Again, I think in our setting, it's largely dictated by the time available. I think you could do a full 45-minute session on this work, but in our setting where we may have 20 minutes at the start of the session, or half an hour as a preparation into a session, we're kind of restricted by those. So we've got to be quite creative and specific in how we are attacking these qualities. But definitely think 20 minutes is a good amount of time to emphasize some of these areas. And then yes, we might take certain elements and apply it in the gym session, just so we can spread out some of that work across a day and fit it within the schedule. But where there are opportunities, I think there are definitely times where we've highlighted players that need this type of work, and maybe put it in the afternoon after a training session, so we can really spend half an hour to 45 minutes on changing direction. Same way we would do that with speed. Some players need that bit more emphasis, and it's not just about giving them 20 minutes, but a session around really understanding how we execute some of these movements.
Cool. That's like so much for speed or movement. Next thing I want to talk is about, like, I know you've been with Chelsea for a long time, right?
Yeah.
Is it like 7 years? I kind of forgot.
8 seasons. 8 seasons. So eight years.
Yeah. So what do you learn the most throughout these 8 years?
That's good question. What have I learned the most? I think naturally from working across the different age groups, one of the big things that I've learned is a real appreciation for how a physical program needs to differ, whether that be with regards to volume and intensities, whether that with regards to complexity, how that needs to differ depending on the age, and given a real appreciation for understanding some of the more contextual factors around an individual. It's because I haven't just worked with one age group. I think I have an appreciation for how growth and maturation might influence things, how external factors as a young child might influence things, and how we need to have a bit of attention towards things broader than the physical qualities when we're developing players. I would also say the importance I think one of the biggest lessons is I am sure many others very much started viewing you're viewing physical development from a testing upwards perspective. So let's test all these players. Let's see where they are, where they benchmark. How does that fit with the average? How does that fit with what we understand to be elite? And then we will program for them. Whereas I have a big belief, a very, very strong belief that isn't the best way to approach training. I think it's important, but I think it's important to spend time with coaches to understand the sport and start from the same place, because coaches tend to start from performance downwards and break it down from there. And I think we can do that better in S&C. I think it's important to start at the same place at the coach and understand what are those performance actions or the performance indicators that we're really trying to improve. Okay. And then understand where testing fits within that. Because I think it can be dangerous in a sense that I think our interventions when we focus on testing tend to be quite structured and rigid. So, okay, this person's RSI is down, so we need to do pogos. And then we have this kind of like routine script that we might play out in our heads. And obviously that differs for different players, but actually starting from performance and how maybe that movement might look, or why they are limited that in performance, and then understanding where RSI and 30-meter speed fit in that process becomes really important. I think that is a real shift in my thinking. And I would say it's a subtle shift, but a shift that's allowed me to appreciate, like we can't assess footwork, right? We can't assess transitional movements, especially if we start from testing upwards. We don't assess that. But if you would start from performance down, you would see that is a really important quality that we need to develop. So I think we can miss some things when we start from a testing upwards approach. And actually we need to think about more where testing fits to help us understand what qualities underpin which performance actions. But definitely starting from performance downwards. And then the last thing I would say I've learnt, I had it in my head, bear with me. It's gone out of my head.
No worries.
I think I think that would be the main real sign. I think the other thing is also just a bit broader than that. I've learned a lot around like the value and the benefit of like a coach-athlete relationship, and that's been a real big lesson, and actually how I can increase my impact as a practitioner if I have built a certain level of rapport and an understanding for an athlete. And also it has been really important to know when to reduce load, or when to increase load, how to coach with this individual, what cues might be best worked for this individual. I think where I used to be as a practitioner was, okay, I want to teach this, so these are my standard coaching points. This is how I need to coach. I think as I've got better at understanding that coach-athlete relationship, I've understand how I need to manipulate without coming outside of me as a coach. I need to manipulate how I might deliver certain information to this individual. What things I might say to, how I might say it to him, or what I might say to him may differ from player to player or age to age. I would say that would probably be the other big lesson I've learned. And I think that's come from having an exposure from on the 9s through to 23s. And actually probably I would say some of the biggest influences on my coaching is probably working with the younger guys. I think the real 9-year-olds, the 8s and 9s and 10s, I don't see that as, I think sometimes it can be viewed as it is a stepping stone to reaching the older groups, but I very much view it's his own skill set. And I think that has had probably the biggest influence on my coaching career, because it's really challenged me to be really detailed and intricate with my coaching points. Because kids can be very literal, they can copy exactly what you say, and if that cue isn't so specific, they might not grasp that. So I had to be really intricate with my coaching cues, but then also an understanding for simplifying the information. I think you have to be simplified with the younger kids. And I think we can tend to talk about knee flexion and trunk flexion and this joint angle and that joint angle with the older guys, whereas coaching doesn't need to be that. It can be very simple as, I want you to push hard. I want you to go far. And really understanding how to use coaching language to affect change. Those would be my points. Sorry if that was clear. It's probably 2 or 3 points there. But.
No, it's good. It's good. I love it. So that's kind of like all the question I have for today.
Okay.
I know you like work with speed work recently, right?
Yeah.
So is it possible that next time we talk about the education event, the thoughts we'll work with like speed work,
yeah,
and dive a little deeper about like change of direction and multi-directional movement. Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. I think we spoke a little bit before about like transitional movements and some of the work that we've been doing around that. So yeah, definitely can dive deeper into that, and something I would really enjoy, something I'm quite passionate about as well. So
cool.
That sounds really good.
So if there's like coaches or athletes are interested in what we are talking about today, where can they reach out to you?
So you can reach out to me on LinkedIn or Twitter. So LinkedIn is my full name, Hailu Theodros. Twitter, it is also, let me double check my handle. I can't remember it off the top of my head.
Cool.
Okay, so it is at Theodros_Hailu. So that, I tend to be fairly active on there. So if there's any questions or would people would like to speak or find out a bit more, those are the 2 main spaces that you can find me on.
Cool. So that's all for today. Appreciate it, man.
Amazing. Thank you very much.
You too.